The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. Nephi Cole, co-host, also host, dual host.
Guy.
Host. What do we want to do it?
I'm an influencer.
Guy. Influencer.
Yep, I don't have a
great American
following
human
on social network, but I'm pretty sure if I did, it would be amazing.
We have not recorded a podcast in ages, man. We've been getting some messages asking if we're going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Well, let's dispel the myth. We're not. We're done.
Yeah, this is it.
This is our last episode. Thank you for all joining us. Everything you've wanted to hear, it's all coming out in this episode because we're never doing one again.
So dial in.
Yep.
Listen
yep.
closely.
Call your friends. This is it. And, it's been good, hasn't it?
It has been good.
If we were going to keep doing episodes, should we start a rap song intro as we go into our...
You played that stupid song before we started this thing. Don't play it now.
I just feel like
it's not suitable for this
I
podcast.
just want to know what our listeners think. I mean, you listen to Bro Country.
I absolutely do not. You heathen, don't put that out there. I can't believe you would say that.
You know, I
mean, you are the guy to talk about that. I've sat in a car with you where you intentionally put on Bro Country to make my ears bleed.
You know what, Dave? It made you a better person.
No, it didn't.
Sometimes our struggles are what make us strong. That's, we're weak today. That's the problem. Like you think you get to listen to just what you want to listen to. Your life is just... It's everybody do what Dave wants, and that's not going to make you better, Dave.
Listen, Bro Country makes you weaker.
I'm going to make you a better person.
The more you listen to it, the weaker you get. It doesn't make you a stronger
human being. It's like kryptonite.
It's like no. It's like no. I don't even have words for it. I can't believe you bring that up in conversation.
Worse than kryptonite.
Yeah, way worse than kryptonite.
Man, this is bad. I feel
guilty
now.
Are you on the record right now?
As what?
Saying that you are a bro fan aficionado?
No, I'm not. I'm on the record as saying that you have sworn allegiance to hating Bro Country, and maybe it's overboard, Dave. Maybe you've gone too far. Maybe
there
you
is
should
no
just
such thing.
Maybe you should just dabble in a little. Blake Shelton from the last 5 years. Maybe you should go.
We can't release this podcast.
Maybe you should go fishing with Luke Bryan when he's in Casper. I mean, you guys are basically bros, like Bro Country.
You have absolutely ruined this podcast for everyone. Everybody's tuned out. Like nobody that listens to this podcast is a fan of Bro Country.
I'd like our listeners to weigh in. Number 1 on the rap intro. Number 2 on Bro Country and how much they love it. And the main reason I want our listeners, everyone, to email and tell us how much you like it is because I don't check the email. You check the email. So it really doesn't matter to me.
Oh man, I can't believe it. So now I'm gonna get floods of email, hopefully. A flood of emails just criticizing Nephi Cole for his adoring of Bro Country and his somehow defending it as some kind of an American institution.
I wanted a rap intro, Dave.
No.
You did this to me.
If you want to give us some Tyler Childers or some Willie Nelson or like, give me something. But come on, man.
Back to the podcast, and this being the last episode. I had a bunch of different people as I've been going around legislative sessions, not a joke, come up to me and talk about the podcast with me, and say they appreciate it, and I think that was really interesting. I mean, people that I don't know and who but recognized the the podcast and say, and just wanted to say thanks and talk about the work that we're not doing because we're not recording enough of them. But it's been appreciated, and I know you appreciate those types of things too. They happen to you too.
I do, and it does happen more often than I think we probably deserve. But every time I run into somebody that says, "Oh man, it's great to see you in person. I've listened to you guys for years," or "Hey, appreciate the stuff you've done." It means a lot, and I do want to. Like you've said it 2 or 3 times that this is the last episode, and I really want to make it clear if people have made it this far that it's not the last episode. At least not for me. You may be quitting. You may be fired because of this whole bro country thing.
Man, I could be. I'm not sure who's in charge. I better be
either.
concerned.
I don't know either.
It's going to make my performance appraisal look bad, though.
It is. I'm calling on Ryan Bronson, John Zinnel.
Ryan Bronson and John Zinnel. Who's Ryan Bronson?
Listen, all of them. I'm calling on all of them.
He used to have a podcast.
To rise up against this un-American, probably borderline unconstitutional. I mean, freedom of speech doesn't include hate speech, right? And I would argue that some of this bro country is borderline hate speech. I think they'll rise up in defense of me on this and against.
Leave it to the Midwest. Leave it to the Midwest to save Dave again.
All right.
I won't tell them. Don't worry.
This.
They're not going to listen to this. I won't tell them what you listen to. You're safe. Moving on.
You know what I listen to? Actually, recently I've been listening to a lot of reggae because I just got back from Hawaii.
That's so funny.
so I have been doing that.
You listen to bro country even though you don't want to. How do I know? Because you live right next to Frontier Park, bro. You listen to bro country every summer. And you can't even help it. There's nothing you can do about it.
Listen, when this is how committed I am to the cause, I see who is on the list of performers, and if it looks like it's just a long list of bro country, that's when we plan our vacation.
Sure you do.
And I get myself out of town. So anyway, let's talk about some stuff.
Let's reconcile.
Yep. Speaking of reconciling, we received some emails wanting us to dive into this reconciliation process going on in DC, and particularly how public lands could plug into that reconciliation process. I know there are a number of other things we want to talk about too on this particular episode, but maybe what do you think? Are you good with us diving into a little bit of a wonky topic?
Let's talk about Yeah, I like it because it's important for a couple of reasons. Because as much as we don't like to, as much as we like to talk about, and I like to talk about this public lands argument being very much politicized lately, reconciliation is a pretty dangerous tool to bring on board to leverage in the public lands argument. So I think it's important that everybody understand it.
So let's talk about what the reconciliation process is. It's a special legislative procedure in the United States Congress that allows certain budget-related bills to be passed more quickly with fewer procedural hurdles. That's like the high. There's your 60,000 foot. Now let's dive in a little bit on, okay, here's how that works. So you might remember, so right now as we're recording this, like just to put a timestamp on it, it's April 25th. And Congress has been adjourned for the Easter recess. They'll come back on April 28th, and they'll immediately start going through this reconciliation process. But one thing that happened before they went on this Easter break is both the House and the Senate passed a budget resolution, right? And this budget resolution is a critical component for being able to do this reconciliation we're going to talk about, process we're talking about. It's a non-binding blueprint that sets overall spending and revenue levels. And part of that resolution process can include what are called reconciliation instructions. They can direct committees to change existing laws to meet budget targets. For example, like how to adjust tax and revenue levels, reduce the deficit, right? Congress is going through a budgeting process, but through this different procedure. And so when Congress comes back and they have now this budget resolution, like I said, this non-binding blueprint that sets these overall spending and revenue levels, they come back and the different committees start getting to work on drafting legislation that meets these instructions. So like the Finance Committee in the Senate, just as an example, might be charged with changing the tax policy to save a certain amount of money. Or like maybe, as we know, the Trump administration wants to, is advocating and encouraging Congress to make the 2017 tax cuts that were passed permanent because they expire in a year, and asking to make those permanent. Okay, well, when you cut taxes, that means you have less revenue coming in to the government, and you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to generate additional revenue, or cut spending in other places to offset those tax cuts, the impact of those tax cuts. That's part of this process that's going on. Okay, so the committees will all do this work, and they'll pass all of these different bills based on the instructions that came out before the recess, and they'll combine all of these bills into a single reconciliation bill. So you've heard that line, from the Trump administration saying, "One big beautiful bill," right? The ask here is to say, okay, all these committees that are passing all of these bills to hit these spending and cuts targets that were set out in this blueprint, like go do all of that work and then combine it all into one bill. You could do it in multiple bills, but the preference from this administration is to say, do it all at once, one shot, let's just get it all done. And then, so once you have that bill, then you're looking at how do you pass this, right? And in the Senate, there are different rules that apply. Remember, I said it's a faster process procedurally, so filibuster doesn't apply. You can't use the filibuster.
That's right, and that's pretty critical because and that's the biggest thing, right? So a lot of these bills that we look at, we're like, where's it going to go? It has to have, you have to have more than majority support. You have to have some pragmatic conversations with members of the other party, but not in this process.
That's right. The other thing that's different, so it can't be filibustered, and it requires only a simple majority, so 51 votes to pass. In the Senate, most bills require a 60 vote threshold to pass, but not on reconciliation, just a simple majority of 51. And there are time limits set for debate. And this one's an interesting one, and a really important piece. It must comply with what's called the Byrd Rule, which limits provisions to those that directly affect the federal budget, meaning spending or revenues. So there has to be this fiscal element. So the Byrd Rule, just for a little bit of context, and sorry to nerd out so much here, but so the Byrd Rule is named after now deceased Senator Robert Byrd. It allows senators to challenge provisions that are extraneous to the budget, meaning like people are trying to push bills that are more policy focused, not fiscally focused.
Yeah, if it does any of increase the budget deficit beyond the budget window, which is a 10-year window typically, produce no budgetary effects or effects only incidental to policy, so it has to have something to do with the budget, or make changes to Social Security, it's out.
Yeah. And the Senate parliamentarian is the one that gets to decide whether these challenged provisions remain in. So it's, you might hear about the Byrd bath, the Byrd rule, whatever it is. Like it has to go through this process unless 60 senators vote to waive the rule. Like there's this way to bypass this Byrd rule, but it takes 60 senators. Well, in a reconciliation process where you're trying to jam a bunch of, in this type of environment where you have the House, the Senate, and the White House all controlled by the same party, and this is viewed as an opportunity to move some of the priorities of the Republican administration, like you're not going to get to that 60 vote threshold. I think I can pretty safely say that. So it has to pass this Byrd rule, the Byrd rule. And then, just like with any bill, once the House and the Senate both pass the reconciliation bill with simple majorities, goes to the president for signature or veto. And like a couple last points, and then we'll just dive into okay, now how does some of this stuff fit in? Only one reconciliation bill can be passed per fiscal year. A reconciliation bill about around the debt limit or revenue or spending. And just to double down on this filibuster point, it's a powerful tool for avoiding the filibuster and enacting major fiscal policies like tax cuts or healthcare reform on a partisan basis. So think about when President Obama passed Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, right? That was done through this budget reconciliation process.
That was in 2010, correct? So it was the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. Yep. And then obviously the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 in the first Trump administration was passed through this reconciliation process as well.
Yep. So there's 9 times it's been used to make significant changes or, basically pass pieces of significant legislation over the past 23 years. The first time it ever happened was 2001. That was the Economic Growth and Tax Relief Reconciliation Act. It was used in 2003. It was used in 2006. And all those, the first one, 2001, that tax act was 1.3 trillion. The others are only in the billions, so not huge until you get, of course, you get 06, 07, you got 10 at 109 billion. Then in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a $1.5 trillion bill basically handed out as a result of that. In 2021, you had 1.8 trillion in the American Rescue Plan. And in 2022, it was also used to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. And that was a $238 billion bill.
Yeah. So this is a common practice when one party controls all the executive branch and the legislative branch. This is a very common practice for trying to advance pretty partisan fiscal policies, right? And so that's what's on the table right now. Now, remember, like one of the biggest priorities of the administration right now is to make permanent the 2017 tax cuts. That comes with a cost because you're reducing the amount of revenue coming into the federal government to pay for all sorts of programs. And one of the things that has been taken off the table in as far as cuts to pay for this are to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, right? Some of those in what are viewed as the entitlement programs, I suppose, is the way they're described. And they constitute a pretty significant chunk of the overall budget. Those are off the table. So if you're gonna find money to pay for the offsets, you have to start getting creative. And it can come through making cuts to agency budgets, right? Cutting, say, workforce. Does this sound familiar? Cutting workforce and staffing and shrinking agency budgets. That brings in some revenue, but it really doesn't come close to covering that gap that you need. So they start looking at other things. And one of the things that's being looked at in this process, which is a way to advance a policy priority of the administration, but through these fiscal means, is okay. If we want to see, if the administration wants to see more oil and gas development, for example, on public lands, well, if you do that through this reconciliation process, you can get it what's called scored. You can get this, okay, you make some assumptions and say, if we open up X number of millions of acres for oil and gas leasing, we expect that to generate X number of dollars. And so over a 10-year time frame. And you can use that estimated revenue to create this offset for the tax cuts. Let me give you a real world example of how that operated in the 2017 law. So in the 2017 reconciliation process, in order to pay for the tax cuts, one of the places the administration looked was to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, right? And said, okay, if we open that north slope of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas leasing, it will generate X number of dollars of revenue over a 10-year time frame. And they used that as a dollar amount of projected revenue to offset some of the tax cuts. Now, in reality, it didn't play out that way. It's sort of, this is the interesting thing, is you're going on projected dollars, not actual dollars. And for folks that have been following ANWR, there had been a lease sale where some acres were sold, and then those leases were canceled, and then there's been litigation, and I think recent litigation just reinstated some of the leases. But in short, there's been no development. The number of leases that have been sold has been very small. Insurance companies have been unwilling to finance companies that are wanting to lease in ANWR. And so it actually hasn't turned into a revenue generator at all. And so when you're looking at that now, if ANWR were on the table again for this tax cut, or for this reconciliation process, it might score differently. They might say, the anticipated revenue there is a lot smaller, so you actually have to find revenue from other places. So that's sort of where the public lands piece comes in. I've been talking a bit. Nephi, I don't know if you want me to kick it to you to talk about the public lands piece, or do you want me to tee that up and then we just go into a dialogue here?
Oh, well, what is there to say about it? So the public lands piece is, we've heard, just so everybody knows, we don't actually plan this beforehand to see who's going to segue where. So sometimes, it gets a little, I don't want to get off track of where you want to go, but I want to say, like, this public lands piece is problematic. It's been problematic for a long time. It's problematic because what you have right now is you have, there are members of, specific delegations that have been on this public lands transfer piece for a long time, and they've been harping on it. And they've been able to get it, resuscitated and revived, this idea that we need to do transfer public lands in multiple ways, through multiple mechanisms. And it's this public lands transfer, cabal is always looking for ways to insert that into some kind of a national policy. And it's just not popular. I mean, that's a reality of it, is when you step back from this, you're going to get, most D's don't support it and most R's don't support it. But you're going to have a group of people who think it's a great idea for a variety of reasons. And we can make arguments about, the good and the bad about that. But the issue that you've got going on here is that now you've got something that's perceived as value, right? Land, real estate. It has worth, it has value. And now you've got a budget reconciliation process where they're saying, well, we got to figure out how to save money. We got to save money. We got to make money. And then you have an administration that unfortunately has been willing to let some of those voices from that cabal start to, meddle in how they think that fiscal policy should be operated in the country, and whether or not public lands should be on the table as a revenue generator through sale of public lands. And so here we are at the reconciliation process, where you are no longer having to convince 60 people in the Senate that this is something that we ought to be talking about. You got to get 50. And that's what makes this a really dangerous time and a really dangerous issue.
Yeah, there are a couple things that do too. So you're right, Nephi. This has been an issue that's come up before, right? So like in 2017, the House budget resolution included a proposal to sell $5 billion worth of public land to offset tax cuts. That was dropped before the final reconciliation bill because of public outcry, and there was no support in the Senate. Right? But this, and in 1995, there were budget proposals also to force large-scale land sales to reduce the deficit, and it failed due to public opposition. Right? Like, the public has been clear, consistently clear for decades that they want to see public lands remain public. But when you're dealing with budget challenges in DC, the other thing is everybody wants their thing, right? The federal government funds so many different things and so many different programs, and everybody wants to see their program and their thing continue to be funded, and you have to pay for that somehow.
Yeah, and that's bipartisan thirst right there, by the way.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm not blaming anybody on this. It's across the board for sure, right? And so you have to start paying for this, and then you have people that say, I don't want to pay more taxes, and so there's, how do you reduce taxes and still pay for programs? You have to create revenue someplace, and people see, for right or wrong, I'd fall in the camp of thinking this is the wrong approach, but they see 640 million acres sitting out there of public land owned by the federal government, managed for all the people. Now, granted, a lot of those are national parks and wilderness areas and forests, but they see in particular the BLM lands in the West, and they have a target on those. And they, for various reasons, we've talked about them on prior podcasts, they're like, that's an asset. Like that's an asset that has monetary value that we could use to help pay down the debt. And there's precedent for it. I mean, if you go back to the early times of the country, lands that the federal government held in the late 1700s, for example, were actually, and into the early 1800s, were actually sold to pay down the national debt, right? The debt that was accrued to fight the Revolutionary War, for example. Some of that was paid for by selling lands, right? And so people see this as an opportunity to sell lands to pay down the debt or to pay for these tax cuts. And what I'd say is now the proposals are getting more creative. Right? I would say, by and large, from folks I've talked to, it's a small minority of members of the House and the Senate that actually would support selling public lands. I think it's a small number. That number changes when you talk about what you sell it for. And I think people have realized this, and this is something that's worth talking about.
Yeah, when you start making promises about what you're going to do with the money and how it's going to help somebody in their district, then it becomes something that they can suddenly find support for. They can justify it because they think that when they go home, they're going to have an argument, because all this is about political economy, and that's important to remember. When you look at what motivates your elected officials, a lot of people think, you think it's money. It's not money. It's political economy that motivates elected officials. So what is that? What is the political economy? The political economy is a vote. It's $1, right? That every person has one. And that is what motivates these guys more than anything else. And now there is, there are mechanisms that you need to be able to effectively campaign, but political economy and understanding it is critically important. It just means that when you want to understand how somebody's going to vote, the most important thing to that politician is going to be looking at their constituency and trying to figure out how they're going to earn that one thing that they need from each individual constituent, a vote. And that is the political economy. So when you start off this thing from the beginning, you start off from the process of having, an unpopular idea. If you go to citizens and you say, hey, what do you think about us giving away public lands, getting rid of your lands, so that we can balance the budget? Most people are going to say like, nah, I'm not sure I'm keen on giving up that thing that belongs to me. But then when you start offering them trades, you start whittling away at the economy of the issue, right? You start saying, well, what if you got this instead? What if it's cheap housing in some place that's like an urban center? Like, let's say you're around Las Vegas and you need land to build and to grow. Well, you offer up that fig leaf of cheap housing, and suddenly the political economy changes for that individual because it changed for their constituency. And that's true across the board. When you start making these promises to people about, well, this is how it's going to benefit you, it starts to shade how an individual representative or senator might think about the issue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you noted one thing Like you said, I don't know if you did it intentionally or not. You probably did it intentionally. The very specific thing you noted is the thing that is going to get some traction. And it is a recognition that in this country we have an affordable housing shortage.
Yep. And so when you start saying something like, I mean, this is an interesting issue, right? You start saying, well, we have this affordable housing issue. We're going to fix it by selling federal lands that can be used for housing. That's going to fix it. Well, it actually doesn't matter if that road, one side of that road actually meets the other. And that's something that's going to need to be talked about and people should be recognizing. So this idea that we're going to sell federal lands to make affordable housing, well, where are you going to build the housing? That's a really important question, because a lot of the areas that we're looking at, I really question whether where is that need? And when you claim that, when you make that claim, it's like, yeah, we're going to sell some BLM and it's going to make housing affordable in where and how. And we're not there yet where people can even, I think make a logical argument on that, but that isn't necessarily important if you're talking about the political economy, because you don't need to show that roadmap. All you need to do is create enough emotional support for the issue. And this is a sick reality of politics. Enough emotional support for this idea, this concept, that it helps you drive what you want towards the finish line, regardless of whether or not that street actually connects to the address you're telling people you're going to.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. Like, here's what's happening. I'm going to put on, maybe it's a slightly tin hat. I don't know. Here's what I see. Affordable housing is an issue that has some bipartisan support. There, right? Like, it does. And I think you and I would sit here across the screen
affordable housing is a
from
great
each other
idea. I
and
love
say,
it.
Yeah, nobody's going to say affordable housing is a bad idea. There might even be some people that say, and I'd be one of these people, that says, look, if there are lands, like if there are federally owned parcels of land that are in a community or adjacent to a community that already have some existing infrastructure on it or have been disturbed in some way, they have really no wildlife value, they have no recreational value, they don't have a ton of economic value in the sense of how you typically would derive economic value from public lands, that maybe you could make the argument that it could make sense to sell those very specific small articulated parcels that are very, very well defined, right? And have gone through a process to determine, okay, are they suitable? But if you start getting 5-10 miles outside of town, or you're starting to say, well, there's lands here in the forest, we could mow these trees down and build a development here, right in the urban rural interface. Then it starts to get more complicated and answers might change, right? And then if you just say, well, maybe we should just draw a circle, a 5-mile or 10-mile circle around communities in the West and identify all the public lands within that circle, and then say, maybe we should just sell those. Well, then I start to think, this isn't really thought through. This is actually trying to achieve a different political outcome than actually affordable housing. And then I think about this. If the goal of selling land is to actually generate revenue to offset tax cuts, then you have to sell it at a market rate. Land close to communities where you actually need to build the housing is going to be far more expensive than land far away from communities where you probably don't need the housing. So if you actually, and the towns that we hear a lot about, you mentioned Las Vegas, but there are other towns that you'll hear a lot about, like Park City, Utah, Jackson, Wyoming.
Yeah,
right?
these are
some of the mountain towns in Colorado.
This is not affordable housing that you're building here.
Well, you can't, right? If you're selling the land in those places at market rate to generate revenue to offset tax cuts, by definition, you're not going to be able to put affordable housing on those. You sell them at market rate, and the land price is so high, and then the cost of building a house is so high. Nobody's going to be able to afford those unless you're donating the land. It's hard to see how you can actually address the affordability issue. And I would also note that, like, some of these, there are two other points here. Some of these affordability issues are self-inflicted, right, by local communities themselves, because they haven't taken that hard step of creating, like, whatever the zoning restrictions and building restrictions and all the things that they need to have to say, hey, maybe we don't want a whole town full of just second homes. Maybe we don't want a whole town of that's just turning into Airbnb properties that are rentals. And there are things that communities themselves could do. And if they don't do those things, if they're unwilling to do those things and they just ask for land, all that's going to happen is you're going to build on that land and then come back and ask for more.
Yeah,
you're not going to actually solve the underlying problem.
It's a red herring. It's a total red herring. And here's why I say that. You built a house recently, Dave? Well, I'll tell you what you're going to do.
No, but you did.
Yeah,
you did.
The cost of the land in terms of building is relatively small when you look at everything else that goes into the price of building.
It depends on where you are. That's my point.
Well, here's what I'd say. You say it depends on where you are, but I say it is relatively small. When you look at the total cost of building, it is unless you're structure.
What do you think the fair market value of a piece of property in Jackson Hole is going to be compared to putting the house on it?
The house is going to be more expensive, even when the property is expensive. The building is going to be more expensive. The materials, the labor, the permitting, everything else that goes into it is going to be more expensive than the half acre.
I disagree with you. I mostly agree with you. I think in most cases you're right. I think there are some of the places where the argument is being made to build housing. But I actually think the land price would be so high that it actually might cost more for the land than the house you put on.
But these are outliers, and here's why I say that, because these areas.
But the outliers are the talking.
If that is, and that's what's ridiculous about it, right? How dumb is this? Like, we're going to help the nation by making it marginally less expensive to build a house in a resort community where the average American isn't going to be there anyway. They're not going to be able to live there. It's got nothing to do with the people, like the average guy who cares about his public lands. This isn't that guy. This isn't helping that guy. It's not helping anybody related to that guy. It's not helping any of that guy's friends. It's helping people that are in a tier of individuals, in a tier of purchasing that is absolutely different. And when you look at the larger communities where they say that this is an issue, it's going to be great for everybody. Pull up your OnX maps and go to Utah and start looking for land. And you tell me whether or not there is a bottleneck of available land in those areas, and it's all just federal. You can't build anything. And what you're going to find is that's just simply not true. There aren't these, generally speaking, there aren't these enclaves of like, well, everybody is so crowded in because they're surrounded by this prohibitive federal land that if we just sold that land, we'd fix our problems. It doesn't exist. When you find the places where that does exist, they're constrained by the geography. They're constrained because if you're talking about selling national forest, it's because everything that's not steep and covered with timber is already built on. And so you're not talking about lands that are going to be where you're going to be building an apartment complex for, or small condominiums and starter homes. That's not what we're talking about here. And so again, are there some people that think that that'd be really great? Yeah, I'm sure that there are. Are there some people that would benefit? Yes, I'm sure that there are. Is it the majority of Americans who are owners of public lands that are going to be really thankful that we made this sacrifice? Absolutely not.
Yeah, and let me go another step farther here, because I want to get into some existing law that's out there as well. So here's what I would anticipate might happen. You might have Congress. Let's stick with this housing thing. You could have Congress have a reconciliation bill that includes some lands for disposal. And what are those lands going to be? My guess is they'll take an inventory of all of the lands that are currently suitable for disposal, which means there is a process under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, under FLPMA. There is a process already in existing law to identify parcels of federal land that might be suitable for disposal for things like affordable housing, right? Like that's a thing that exists. And there's a process, a legal process that you have to undertake to do that. One of those things is you have to go through the land use planning process, and then you identify these parcels in the land use planning process. That's actually been done in a lot of places around the West in these processes. What I'm saying is it wouldn't surprise me if that number were aggregated and Congress included that number in this reconciliation bill to say, look, these are already acres that have been identified through a public process, through land use planning, as lands that are suitable for disposal. And so all we're doing is disposing of those. They've already been identified. We're going to dispose of them. I anticipate that might be the type of thing that happens. And here's what I would say, like in response, and why I think there's a little problem there. First of all, one is some of these land use plans where these acres have been identified are 30, sometimes 40 years old. And the reason why I say that is they were identified at a time before we had things like Onyx or other even just handheld GPS units where you could find parcels of public land more easily to be able to access them for recreational purposes and other purposes. And I wonder if the analysis would be the same today in an RMP process on some of those parcels, now that you know how to get to them. I know people that in Colorado, for example, in the Dolores River area of Colorado, there are parcels that have been identified for sale. And I know people that have said, I've stood on that ground and hunted turkeys there. It's great wildlife habitat, right? Yet it's been identified for disposal, probably because it was viewed as isolated and hard to get to. And it might have been 30 years ago or 35 years ago before we had the technology for the public to be able to locate and access these places. So that's one point. The second point is when you do this through a budget reconciliation process, if they were to sell them this way, that money goes into the general treasury, right? Because you're trying to offset losses to the general treasury. Here's a fact that I'm guessing the majority of people do not know is a thing that is out there. I'm just going to pose the question and then I'll answer it. How many people listening have heard, Nephi, have you heard of this? Have you heard of the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act?
No, I haven't, Dave.
Well, and I'm guessing a lot of people haven't heard of this act. The Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act was signed into law in 2000 for 10-year time period, and then it was reauthorized in perpetuity in 2018. What was in 2018? Who was president in 2018? Question for you, Nephi.
I think it's the same guy who's president now.
Right. Signed into law, reauthorized in perpetuity in 2018. Under this law, FLPMA, we'll just call it, I'm not going to do that acronym, it's too hard to say, Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act. Revenues from the sale or exchange of BLM managed public lands that have been identified for disposal in approved land use plans. They wind up being deposited into a federal land disposal account, and that money is then used for purchasing other lands or interest in other lands like easements that have high conservation or recreation value. So the idea is if you're going to sell off public lands that have low value, you're going to take the revenue from those to be able to buy lands that have high value, which could lead to either a no net loss or potentially a gain in the federal estate. And then what you end up with overall are higher quality lands with better access and better recreation values. That's the current system we have for, disposing of federal lands and taking the proceeds from those. So it goes back into the system and helps perpetuate the public land system. If you do it through reconciliation, that goes away. That's gone. I think that's a really important piece that's overlooked. I don't know. You've never heard of it. I don't know what you think of it, but that's a law that exists.
I think it's extremely important. I think that there's major peril in what's going on right now. And part of the challenge with this is that the individuals who are pushing this, it's Doge. It's the same individuals who have been working on these discussions of shaving federal agencies, and they're looking at this through, I believe, the same window. And so I think you have the existing cabal, the people who have been talking about this for a long time and are never going to stop. Utah, thank you very much. Which is they're just going to keep pushing this thing no matter what, and it doesn't matter who's in charge. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It's just they're gonna ride this horse. It's not going anywhere. Horse is dead, but they're gonna keep pushing this thing downhill, hoping it actually gets someplace sometime. Now the problem is when you bring in a group of people in again, it's like we talked about these agencies. There are folks that they're somewhat new to this argument. And they see this differently. They don't see it the way that the majority of Americans see it. They don't see it the way that people who are intimately tied to these Western lands issues see it. They see it through ones and zeros. They see it through a calculator. And they're just whacking the numbers into a calculator, imagining that they've come up with a unique, great solution. And the problem is you can't measure everything in dollars. You can't measure every value in dollars. You can't measure every outcome in dollars because you don't have the expertise, they don't have the expertise to consider the whole of the economic effect. And that is not just the economy of right now, but the opportunity cost of doing this. When you start getting rid of federal lands, you're not just talking about the dollar value from today, what that thing is worth today. You have to consider, and this is what is not being considered by those individuals who are purely looking at a quick turnaround, a current time frame, a very cutthroat way of doing business. What they're not considering is what is the value going to be of having that mountain in the future. I'll use a personal story. So we have a little cabin, an area that belongs to our family that is on the Bighorns in Wyoming. And it's my wife's family, and she's an only child of two only children. And they've had that cabin in their family for 3 generations. It's small. It's a couple acres.
It's beautiful though. It's beautiful.
Right on it's 100 yards away from a trailhead. And there's 2 streams that flow through it. And my father-in-law, several years ago, it's when my boys were still younger, was talking about how, well, maybe it would be better to have an RV, because then he could, drive around and take the kids to Disneyland or whatever else it was. And so at the time, I know what the value of that piece of property was at the time, and I can tell you it's literally 3 times what it was then. Just the value of it with an old cabin on it. And he was talking about, potentially moving on from that. And here's what I told him. I said, never sell it. Because here's what you need to realize about a spot like this. They're not making more mountains. They're not making more streams. They're not making more lakes. Once you lose these places, you lose them forever. Because the chance that my kids are going to be able to come back and purchase that same opportunity for the dollar value or even, adjusted, it's zero. It's never going to happen. And that is the case with these federal lands. The chance that you are going to get, that your kids, my kids, are going to get access back to that place that we've lost for a reasonable value is zero. We'll never get it back. That's what you can't put in your calculator at Doge. That's what you can't understand when you're trying to calculate this thing out. Because you might be able to make the economic argument about why it works to balance this budget. But here's what you're not considering in that argument. You're not considering the all of the values to the 300 billion people plus who that belongs to. You're not including the opportunity cost of the camping trip or the hunting trip that will never occur because you don't have the land anymore and you can't get it back.
Yeah. And that's a perfect point. And that doesn't even get into some of the other stuff. Like once this land is out of the federal control, who bears the burden of fighting fires? Who bears the burden of infrastructure improvements on it? If it goes to a community, it's local governments in the state. And like don't know for sure if they can afford it.
Yeah, I mean, that argument, I think we need to stay away from those arguments in some cases, because here's the thing. Like, I will never agree that, like, you couldn't figure out a way to pencil it out, whether you're that local community or let's say that states are doing it, because land has value, right? And so the same thing will happen. They'll go in, they'll try and make an economic way to make it work. Could they make it work? Yeah, they could. I think that they can. So we should quit arguing that because they can't make it work, that's the reason not to trade it. No, that's not the reason. The reason is that it has greater value to us. It has greater
There's lots
value.
of reasons not to.
It has
Lots of reasons not to.
greater value to the people who own it now. And
How
again,
about the fact that, I don't know about you, but I learned to shoot on public lands.
everybody
Like, that's-
did. We want people to be shooting on public ranges too, but everybody took a cardboard box out onto the, and I say everybody. In the West.
But in the West, that's what we did. You went to what was closest to your community, actually, which might be some of these lands that people want to sell to build housing. That's where I learned to shoot. If I hadn't learned to shoot, I might not have gotten into hunting. If I didn't get into hunting, I might not have the same appreciation for the outdoors that I have today, that kind of thing. So, like, there's this cascading effect that I think is emblematic of a lot of Americans, and particularly in the West where these public lands are. Like, that's where we learned to be who we are as an individual. So there's some deep, like...
It's interesting that you bring up shooting, because that's another one that's huge, on especially with the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service and others having now taken it upon themselves to make sure that recreational shooting is included in things that they have to do within their areas of responsibility. You lose those areas of responsibility, you lose those opportunities. There is this thought out there that you can privatize this. I don't think that's reasonable. And, as a hunter, I'll say this, that we put $1 billion a year in Pittman Robertson money into creating opportunities for hunting and shooting sports. And people would ask, I've heard this argument, I've had this argument this year where people say, like, no, we shouldn't be investing Pittman Robertson dollars in things like habitat and ranges. We should let the private, let private interests do those things. You're hurting private interests. Here's the reality. Like, you're not going to see that. You're not going to create the same level of opportunity. Nobody's going to provide, you look at what's the size of the Bighorn National Forest, Dave? How many, millions, hundreds of thousands, millions of acres is that? Like, you're not going to fix that with a private opportunity. There's nobody that's going to be able to create that same opportunity for you. You live in, I know you live in Iowa. You've never been to Idaho to hunt, but you want to someday. You'd like to go. And the reality is, if you let these opportunities go, like, you can't buy that back. It's impossible. And I mean, that's the peril that we sit at right now, is this idea that we can trade the idea. And remember this, we're trading the idea of cheap housing. We're saying, aren't you upset that your house costs a lot more than it used to? Here's the fix. Sell federal lands. It's gaslighting. It's not a reality. It doesn't happen. These things that are driving the costs of housing and groceries and everything else, these things aren't solved by selling federal lands. It doesn't fix the problem. You're looking at, you're taking aspirin and you have a stomach ache. The medicine might work for something, but it doesn't work for this. And that's the issue that we're running into here.
Yeah, I like to use this analogy of you're draining the lake to water your lawn, right? Like, yeah, it's going to be green for a minute, but that lake's may not refill. That once that water's gone, it might be gone. So it was green for a minute, but in the long term, you're worse off.
I think a better analogy might be you're draining the lake to mow your lawn, because you're not actually, like, the thing that you're doing over here isn't actually what's causing what's fixing the problem over there. You can make the argument that, like, wouldn't you like your lawn to look nice? And so therefore, well, yeah, I'd like my lawn to look nice. Well, then let's drain the lake.
How about this? You're selling your pasture to save your farm.
Yeah.
Like, you sell the land to save the farm. I don't know. There's another piece of this, and I'll just say kind of the last. Go ahead.
Before you get to the last, we know, unfortunately, that our that our listeners tend to be wonky and lots of policy folks, and we're not the most trendy podcast. But here's the thing. For those of you who work in these offices, and there are people listening to this podcast that do, people will figure out that this doesn't work. And here's the other thing. Like, this may sound great, and we have a courage issue going on here, Dave. We have an issue where everybody knows this is a bad idea, but it's so popular right now to care what Doge thinks that there are people that are scared to speak up and say, like, hey, you know what? We should probably do the right thing, not the popular thing. This is a situation where we can't afford to not do the right thing, because you can't undo this. This isn't a policy decision that the next office, the next elected official can come in and take it back and make it right. There's no way to go back on this. You screw this up and you're done.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It actually leads to a comment that I really did want to make. Okay, what are the next steps on this? Like, how do you deal with this? Right. So here's where I am. I'm in the camp. I'm in the camp of thinking that there's some pressure, like you noted, being applied by the Doge team. Like, I'm a believer that there's some pressure from them to Congress saying, hey, you should consider including these lands as part of this reconciliation process to help pay for these tax cuts that we're trying to move, right? And I actually think that members of the House and the Senate largely are opposed to doing this. I in my core, I deeply believe this, that they don't want to sell public lands. And the stories that we've seen floated out there about Republicans considering this could be one of those things where that was intentionally floated because they need the cover of their constituents so that they can actually do exactly what you talk about.
Well,
they can do what Representative Zinke did in Montana, where he kind of gave a cold dead hands kind of speech, saying public lands now, public lands forever, right? And he's got a constituency in Montana that's very loud and very pro-public lands and actually can determine outcomes of elections. Back to your earlier point about the electoral politics, like how that matters more than money, the election economy, or I can't remember the political economy. Yeah, it matters more than the fiscal economy in a lot of ways. You're right, and that's a perfect example of it. I have no doubt he deeply believes what he says too, but it just also helps that he has this constituency that is loud and votes on this issue. And I think maybe what other members of Congress are saying is, I see what's happening in Montana, and I need that to happen where I'm living too, to give me the ability to have that
100%
that kind of cover to stand up and do it. So, but it has to be done in the right way, right? You can't turn these people that want to do the right thing into enemies.
Yeah. As soon as you so Zinke's a great example. Ryan Zinke has been he's one of the guys that is standing in the breach right now.
And Senator Daines is another great example.
Senator Daines, you have, and it's because people in Montana, Daines and Sheehy and Zinke, they all heard
Downing
they all heard from their constituents, like, this isn't a good idea for us.
Simpson in Idaho.
Yep. Idaho's another, like, and again, these Western states are great examples. And so here's what happens when they hear that. Again, the political economy, they're gonna stand in the breach. They're gonna do the right thing. If your representative doesn't hear that, they don't have that backing, they're gonna hear from somebody else. Again, they're gonna be it's the political economy. They're gonna make some assumptions about how they should vote. Now, go back to Montana and think about this. And this is a cautionary tale. If you make the mistake in Montana of arguing that this is a political issue and that you have to choose like D's versus R's, if you make this into that issue, guess what you just did in Montana? If you decide that the way to win this fight is to build a bonfire underneath Daines and underneath Zinke and start saying inflammatory things about them, guess what's going to happen? you're incentivizing them to go over to the other side where they can feel supported. You're basically chasing them into the decision that you don't want by being unwilling to support them and say good things about them because of the Republican next to their name. Do not do that. Whichever state you're in, don't make it political. Don't yell at people because of their political party. Don't claim that one party's better than the other when you talk to them about this issue. This is not an issue that should be a partisan issue. And if you make it a partisan issue, you are part of the problem. Because as soon as you make this a partisan issue, you have now divided the groups, and you've made it much harder in this razor thin margin world that we're living in right now. By making the issue political, the only thing you're doing is it is clear it's purely pandering to a political base to try and gain money for votes in that political economy world because you want to try and win the election. You don't really care. If you're making this about parties, you don't really care about the outcome. You care about the next election, and that's what you're going for. I could care less, and I hope most of you feel the same way. I hope most of you are saying, like, no, I'm not willing to wait, and hope that I can fix the problem by electing new people. No, I'm going to get the people that are in office right now to vote the right way. That is what you should be doing. That's what we should all be doing. That is the goal. If you choose the other direction for pure political power and muscle for those reasons, you deserve what you get.
Yeah, I'm gonna double down on that and say an additional thing. I'm seeing some groups politicize public lands in a way that I think is could cause extended harm to defending the existence of the lands. Right. And by that I say, if you have a frustration with somebody, let me say it this way. Public land management decisions, like how our public lands are managed. Should they be managed for grazing, for oil and gas, for renewables, for hunting and angling, for outdoor recreation, for mining, for you name it, all the things. Everybody has an opinion on that. And it can get kind of political, right? Should you have land designated for monuments or areas of critical environmental concern? Like, everybody has a thing that they want, and that's very political. So the management of public lands is a political issue, and inherently so, and I get it. The existence of public lands is a value. It's not political. It should be values-based. And it's not a political issue. The problem I have right now is that you have people out there that are meshing the two and that are saying, if you oppose a monument designation in this place, you are anti-public lands. If you oppose oil and gas drilling in this place, you are anti-public lands, right? And that message frame is taking something that is political, which is the management of public lands, and inserting it into something that shouldn't be political, as in the existence of public lands. We have to separate those. And we have to, in this particular moment in time, it's especially important not to conflate all of those things and to stay hyper-focused on the existence of public lands. It is not partisan. It is something we care deeply about. Like you said, once they're gone, you don't get them back. They're part of our heritage. They're part of our value. I actually have made the argument that they are part of what makes the United States a wealthy and free country, because they provide, they're our water resource for the West. They provide energy for the country. So energy, food, fuel, security, like the things that we need to have a prosperous society and be the wealthiest nation in the world. A lot of that stuff comes from public lands. Most of our winter vegetables, if you go buy vegetables in the winter, that probably anywhere in the country, that probably was grown by water that originated on public lands in the West, right? They are critical to our security as a nation and our prosperity as a nation. I would argue that in a lot of ways, in addition to the heritage piece, there are strategic national defense reasons for having public lands. They're important. And we cannot be conflating those with the actual political discussions about how we manage those lands. And that's my opinion. And I actually think it gives people an out that are frustrated with how lands are managed. If you conflate them, it gives those people an out to say, fine, we'll just sell them. We can do a better job. Let's just sell them. Right? Keep them separate.
I feel like that was a great, Dave. I agree with you. One of my favorite books is a book called Undaunted Courage that talks about the Lewis and Clark expedition. Read it if you haven't. And one of the things that I think I think when you look at that expedition and Lewis and Clark, I like to think of that as being fundamentally who we are as Americans. As we are explorers, we are frontiersmen, we are, if you look at Captain Lewis and you look at he was, the education, and he was a botanist and he was a leader. And you look at, he was a man of letters, but then you look at, all the things he was able to do. Fundamentally, I think that's who we should strive to be. We should strive to be intelligent and smart and explorers and face danger and all these things that I think are uniquely American. When people call us, around the world, like the cowboys of the world or whatever, you look at, what does that mean? Well, it's because of the types of opportunities we've had to grow and learn and face adversity and be outside. And I think fundamentally, the only frontier we have right now, we're a settled nation now, but we still have pockets of the frontier. We have places that we can go and explore. We have a unique ability to be able to find ourselves in situations that are uncommon to the 21st century, that are, no matter where we live in this country, that take us back to our roots of fundamentally who we are. And I think when you look at all the problems, that you want to fix in our country, everybody talks about the ways they want to fix them. And a lot of it comes down to these things about like becoming reacquainted with nature, becoming reacquainted with, becoming recentered, becoming, understanding our place in the universe, and all these things, like these opportunities to do these things are uniquely at our fingertips. What a tragedy it would be to lose that identity, to consider it to be for sale. We can't afford it. There's too much. And, that's my opinion. And no one's going to change it. And I know that there are people that, I have friends who are cattle ranchers who have large ranches. And I think what people forget, you go watch Yellowstone or 1923 or whatever you're watching to kind of get your, think about the West, is like these arguments about the value of land for an individual and families and businesses, they apply to you as an individual too. Because, we are part of this. You are part of the West. And, there's a quote that I absolutely love that's inscribed on my 11th great-grandfather's tombstone. And it's in Plymouth, where he stepped off of the boat. And on his tombstone, it says, "What your forefathers have gained through such difficulty, do not give away lightly." And it's inscribed in Latin on his tombstone. The same applies to each one of us. What our forefathers have gained through such difficulty, don't give it away lightly. This is something we need to think about very cautiously. And it's not something to be trifled with. It's who we are. Don't sell it.
So let me wrap a bow around this and say this. This reconciliation process is fully underway. Committee meetings happening, negotiations happening starting April 28th. I mean, it's really happening right now quietly, but it's going to be far more public starting then. There are going to be committee hearings. There are going to be bill markups. This process is going to play out a lot faster than you think. Like the push, the president wants something, and the leadership of the House and Senate are targeting like Memorial Day. Now, there's always the target date and the reality date. It's probably unlikely to hit that target date of Memorial Day, but recognize that this isn't going to bleed deep into the summer or into the fall or into the winter. Like this process for reconciliation is going to move fast. And so that means everybody listening has to move pretty fast too. It doesn't mean scream from the mountaintops. It means make some phone calls, send some emails. If you have friends that have relationships with members of Congress or the Senate, lean on those relationships and talk about why this is important and see if they'll make phone calls. Make phone calls yourself. Send in letters yourself, talk on social media, whatever you want to do, however you feel comfortable getting the word out, write opinion pieces, write letters to the editor, talk about the importance of these things and how public lands shouldn't be part of this reconciliation process, shouldn't be sold off to pay for these tax cuts, right? Like if that's something you believe in. Now, maybe there's some of you listening. They're like, no, I'm good. We can sell those lands. I'm fine with it. For those of you, don't make those phone calls. Just kidding.
Sorry. This is our last episode anyway. So you can't get mad at us and quit listening.
but do it's everybody standing up is going to be very, very important here. They need to hear from each one of you. They need to hear from their constituents. They need to know that this is not something that their constituents support, and this is not something that they can get behind. And so, I'd encourage that. But recognize also that even after this reconciliation process, if lands are not included in there, it doesn't mean it's over. I just saw. And I think I sent it to you, Nephi, and maybe you've seen the news stories now, the leaked Department of Interior strategic plan. There are lines in there that talk about selling public lands for affordable housing. Of course, that's not a defined term. We don't know where, how much land, all that sort of thing. Public land sale or disposal is going to continue to be an issue. There will still be, you'll have bills after reconciliation. You'll have bills introduced in Congress by some members looking to do certain creative things with land sale. I would suspect that those don't get traction. I think on the congressional side, the opportunity to get traction to do something is in this window of reconciliation. But there are still legal processes that exist for selling public lands through FLPMA that we talked about that might be used by the administration in ways we haven't contemplated before. So that's worth watching. That draft strategic plan gave me pause. And I know that there was an agreement between Housing and Urban Development and Secretary of Interior about trying to identify parcels for affordable housing. Look, like I said at the beginning, I'm not opposed to that. There actually might be parcels here and there that really do make sense. And so that might be a worthy exercise. But there's going to be a level of accountability necessary to make sure that this isn't used as some sort of a Trojan horse of some sort to go in there and raid the public lands and sell off a ton of them. So we've got to be kind of diligent. My thinking has evolved over the past several months. I initially thought the biggest threat was through the judicial branch. I still believe that's a threat. I still believe that you might see the state of Utah refile its case that the Supreme Court did not accept jurisdiction on at some point. But maybe they sit and wait until this reconciliation process ends and they see what the administration might do. Maybe they get some of what they want that way and they don't have to file the lawsuit for a while. And so I wasn't that concerned about the congressional angle, but with some of the things Doge has done and some of the tactics, it makes me a little more nervous now that could be something we have to be on the lookout for.
Well,
yeah,
it's been a good time, Dave.
Yeah, great time.
Yeah.
I will say two things to end, and then if you have anything, our friend Brian Nesvik was voted out of committee to be the next director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and now just awaiting a Senate vote. And so this is me saying I encourage the Senate to take up that vote and confirm Brian as soon as possible. I think that would be great to see that leadership in place. And then sort of the breaking news today in the same vein is our longtime friend and colleague, Scott Talbot, former director of the Game and Fish Department, just lost his battle with pancreatic cancer. And it was very sad news, and just lots of condolences to all of his friends spread far and wide across the country, and his family. He was a strong advocate for wildlife in Wyoming and nationally. He cared deeply about the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and its people, and he'll be deeply missed. Those are my two things. I don't know if you had anything else.
Well, we were actually going to talk about the DOI plan and
and
also an update on federal agency staffing issues. Those were actually, we have talking points for both of those, but guys, we didn't get to them this episode because we couldn't get off of our rants about public lands. So
maybe what we should do is record a second one really, really soon. So we put them out regular,
we should,
when it's timely, and we can talk about both things in a timely fashion.
Yeah, well, we should.
Does that mean you're committed to continuing with the podcast?
I guess we'll come back. We'll do another one. This wasn't the last episode because we still got to talk about that other stuff. So as long as there's stuff to talk about, we'll be here.
And are you willing to commit to never talking about bro country again?
Nope, I won't. But you should consider the rap intro.
No, man.
Yeah. Give the people what they want. I want to know what the emails say, Dave.
Let's
give the people what they want.
I'll throw it out there. Your Mountain at itsyourmountain.com. Yes or no to bro country? Yes or no to a rap intro? I'm very curious.
It'll be more like, it won't be an intro. We're never going to change. We can't afford to redo like our intro that we already have. We're never touching that thing. This would be like an interlude.
Fine. Send us feedback on that then. Your Mountain at itsyourmountain.com, or hit us up on social media at the handles at itsyourmountain. Let us know what you think about bro country. Oh man, I hope my gut is right and that our listeners are not bro country fans. Like, my gut tells me our listeners are not bro country fans, and I hope I'm right about that.
Hey, and I want to do a special shout out before we get done. I want to shout out the Montana delegation. Thank you.
Heck yeah. Yeah. I'll double down on that. Huge thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
It is not a popular place to be in right now because they're fighting a tough battle, and they haven't, there aren't a lot of...
It is a popular place to be in because the populace agrees with them.
There you go.
That's what I'm saying.
I stand corrected.
They're standing up for the people right now, and they're doing the right thing. And I applaud them. I applaud them deeply for it. Great shout out, Nephi. I really appreciate that shout out. And I'd also give one last shout out. I know there are a lot of people out there in the hunting community that care deeply about this and are very engaged, some of them in a very public way, some of them behind the scenes. For everybody doing your part on this, deep thanks for all that you do. Like, it's one of those, it takes an army to do this. And so deeply appreciated everybody's engagement on it. I got nothing else. I don't want to give you any more time because I'm afraid you're going to start singing some sort of a Luke Bryan song. Is that the guy's name? Anyway.
I have no idea, Dave. I don't
know. The one you brought.
I don't know, but you do apparently.
I thought that's the guy you brought up. Wasn't that the name of the guy?
Oh, Dave, I think you should just confess. There you go. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you listening. Tune in next time. There will be a next time. We're going to keep producing these once a year, once a month, once a week. It's hard to say, but they're still going to come. And we appreciate you for being here for the ride. And as always, remember, life is about experiences. So go have one.